Disney. My family is a menagerie.
The foothill country of California is one of those parts of the United States where change comes seldom and generally kind of slow. But on this day, change was coming to the little town of Lakeside at around 50 miles an hour. It seems the population of Lakeside was about to be increased by one young widow, several assorted dogs of uncertain background, plus the entire contents of an ex-pet shop from the big city down south. The woman's name was Sally Grant, and she'd stopped at Clint Plummer's service station just to get a few directions. But Clint and Sheriff Eddie Patton were all tied up with a problem out and back, a little matter of a skunk under the house. The way Sally saw it, the men didn't have any problem at all. It was the skunk that needed the help.
Well, come here.
This situation was made to order for Sally. All her life, she'd had a sort of magic way with animals. It had never let her down yet. This time was no exception.
That's a good little skunk. We'll find a better home for you.
Was the first, but not nearly the last time that Sheriff Eddie Patton would have an animal problem solved by Sally Grant. You couldn't have asked for a better introduction to Lakeside, especially if you were going to open up a pet shop here. And that's exactly what Sally planned to do. Out on the edge of town was some property she'd inherited from a very old and distant relative. At one time, this little farm and the old-timer who owned it had been the center of the world for a one-man dog named Duke. All that was changed now, but for Duke, there was only one place and one person. Of course, Sally didn't know anything about that. Anyway, she had a more immediate problem to face. She'd been told the place was a little run down, but this was ridiculous. Well, it hadn't cost her any money. But she was going to have to make a big investment just the same, in time and labor. The animals tried to get into the act, but mostly they did more hindering than helping, especially when they just sat around and looked critical. Fortunately, Sally did have some helpful help, too. She'd hired a part-time assistant named Julie Morgan. When the work was done, there was just time enough for a little pet shop warming party. Then Sally was open for business. Lakeside had been needing someone like Sally for a long time. In a matter of weeks, she got to be nearly indispensable to a lot of people, and especially to Sheriff Eddie Patton. Of all the animals around Lakeside, about the only one that Sally didn't know yet was Duke. These days, he was living in a cave a little ways up the hill. That way, he could be close to his old home and far enough away to keep out of sight. About daybreak one morning, though, homesickness and curiosity finally got the better of him. Being lonesome and people-shy, Duke was always on the lookout for four-footed friends. Well, right now he'd hit the jackpot. A whole cage full of canine companionship. Duke wasn't the kind to let a little thing like a closed door be any bar to friendship. Having friends was fine, but one big point had to be settled right away. Who was boss? Duke was boss, right? Right. Good enough. Might as well start off with a guided tour of the territory. Whenever dogs get together, happiness is a car to chase. This model suited them right to a T. That horseless carriage took them most of the way to town, and from then on, one thing just sort of led to another. The youngster wasn't hurt, of course. He was just crying about that lost ice cream. But what with people moving in on him and all the noise, seemed like time to head for the hills. It had taken Sally and Julie most of the morning to follow the twisted trail of that pack of sightseers. By noon, it had led them right back to the hill above the house. That was the first time Sally'd ever caught sight of Duke. She'd find out more about him later. At the moment, she was busy enough with her own dogs. Matter of fact, it wasn't long before Sally's pet shop was also the Lakeside City Pound, with Deputy Sheriff Sally Grant officially in charge. Between the pet shop and the pound, Sally's menagerie was constantly changing, but it never seemed to get any smaller, and that suited Sally just fine. Things couldn't possibly be any better, with just one exception, and Sally had already started working on him. By this time, Duke had got used to the idea of strangers living in his old home. But while he'd come to accept the fact, he wasn't about to accept any people. He just couldn't stay away, though. Besides, there was one pretty good reason for dropping down there once in a while. You see, Duke's story had been told to Sally. She figured a little food and a lot of patience would bring him around eventually. Fate had other ideas. It all started with a radio call.
Sheriff Patton calling Deputy Grant, Sally Grant. Eddie Patton calling Sally Grant. Come in, Sally.
This is Sally. Go ahead, Sheriff.
Got an accident at the Big Bend on River Road. Looks like some animals involved. Can you get right over here?
Okay, I'll be right there.
Sally and Julie arrived to find they had a real mystery on their hands. About all Eddie Patton could tell them was that the wagon driver, old Gypsy Joe, was on his way to the hospital, unconscious. If the signs were right, though, no telling what kind of animals might be running loose. There sure weren't any of them left in here. There was only one clue, and it spoke for itself.
Hi there, cutie.
Well, hi there, lover boy.
You're pretty. What's your name?
The macaw was friendly enough. If the rest of the animals were this friendly, they'd be easy to round up.
I'm the lover.
Oh, you.
I love you.
Hey, look!
His name was Linus. He was a baby spider monkey. He didn't look like much of a problem, but little Linus had big ideas.
Come on. You don't have to run away. Come on here. Come on. Come on here to me. Take it easy now. I'm not gonna hurt you. Come on. Come back. Come on. Come back here. Where do you think you're going anyway? Come on.
Well, Linus had about carried this thing far enough. About time to let himself get caught. By the time Duke arrived on the scene, Sally had already covered the area without finding any more animals. Looked like she was going to have to widen the search, and that'd take some planning. This was the craziest collection of scents Duke had ever come across. Only one thing to do. Take them one by one and find out what was making them. Meantime, back at the pet shop, Sally was combing through a scrapbook Eddie Patton had found in the wreck. It is mostly just a pile of clippings, none of them very new, but they did include Linus and Loverboy, so Sally assumed the rest of the list was accurate. Apparently, there was an African sheep or owdad named Hannibal. Hannibal had a problem. He loved people, and right now he couldn't find any. Yogurt, the Himalayan bear, was a professional wrestler by training, and as always, he was just itching for a nice neighborly match. The two monkeys, Fingers and Magnolia Blossom, weren't wasting any time making the most of their freedom, while Buttercup, like the tame, good-natured deer she was taking freedom right in her stride. To Hurricane, the Siberian falcon, freedom meant the whole blue sky to fly in and not a soul around to call him back to earth. There was only one more animal on the list. The scrapbook said it was a kangaroo. Of course, Sally couldn't know that he'd just been traded for Shandi, a 4-year-old Asian leopard. Sally's first step had been to have the wagon set up and to leave some food out around it. Now, if any of the animals did come back, they'd have a reason to stay. Just about now, a couple of miles away, Duke was closing the gap between himself and the first of the strangers. It just happened to be Hannibal. All Duke had on his mind was striking up a friendship. But Hannibal had people on his mind, and no dog was going to sidetrack him. Well, that put a real damper on Duke. He'd be a little more careful with the next one. As for Hannibal, the one thing he needed to make him happy turned out to be just over the next hill, asleep on a rock. Around Lakeside, Jake Evans was known as one fisherman that always told the truth. But no matter how he looked at it, that thing up there was a lie. Well, a thing like this only happened to a man once in a lifetime. He could bring home a lie and prove it was true. While all this was going on, Sheriff Patton was out passing the word about the missing animals, and Sally was scouting around looking for them. Right at the moment, though, it was Duke who was doing all the finding, and that big fella looked even worse than the last one. Might be best just to stay out of his way. He sure picked the right bear to stay away from. The thing about Yogurt was, he could cause trouble by just minding his own business. All he did was walk past Fred Johnson. still trailing trouble behind him, and some of it almost rubbed off on Buttercup the deer. The only thing that saved her was the fact that Fred couldn't hit the broad side of a barn with a banjo. Naturally, that one shot had Sally pretty worried. A few minutes later, though, she found Buttercup. The doe was relaxed and unhurt, and that was quite a relief. By the time she got her home, though, Sally started worrying all over again. After all, there were 6 more helpless animals out there that still had to be rounded up. During the few hours that had passed now, the 2 monkeys had let freedom go completely to their heads. They were never going to go back to that dull old wagon. The leader of the expedition was called Fingers, and he hadn't come by a name like that for keeping his hands to himself. Magnolia Blossom was happy just to tag along, and smart enough to stay out of the way when she saw trouble coming. In most ways, Fingers was a perfectly normal monkey, as monkeys go. Well, he'd spent a lot of time lately watching California drivers, and he knew just how to act in an automobile. Now, within easy scampering distance was the remains of an old farm. To a pair of footloose monkeys, it was a regular palace of pleasure. While Blossom went for a little workout on the parallel bars, Fingers stopped by the casino to try his hand at the old shell game. Looked like they had company. Friendly-looking little feller, too. Maybe they ought to drop down and get acquainted. The sweet scent of freedom had sure turned sour on them now. All of a sudden, there was no place like that old home wagon for a couple of mighty aromatic monkeys.
Whoa, you two need a bath. Come on. All right, you too. Come on.
Fingers felt obligated to put up a little last-minute token resistance. But all in all, he was pretty happy about the way things worked out. He was socially acceptable again, and he just couldn't stop talking about it.
Hi, Sally.
Oh, hi, Eddie. Hi, Mr. Patton.
Hi, Julie. I brought something you might be interested in. It's a character with a beard.
Oh, good. The Owl Dad. Oh, Julie, would you put him back in the cage, please? Mm-hmm. Come on, Fingers.
I put him out in that pen with the deer.
There you go, good looking.
Fingers had already had an overdose of freedom today. Just the same, as soon as they stuck him in a cage, he wanted some more of it. Well, monkey see, monkey do. So far, the roundup was going along a lot better than Sally had expected, and that is good. Of course, she was mostly concerned about the animals that were still on the loose. But at this point, she should have been concerned about a couple that were supposed to be safe. Fingers figured this place was ready-made to be taken apart, and he was just the monkey to do it.
What was that?
I don't know.
Early the next morning, Sally and Julie were out hunting animals again, and so was Duke. All he'd found, though, was just what he'd found once before, that crazy bear. Yogurt was a passing acquaintance now, and this time Duke was less cautious and more curious. That's how he came to be the only eyewitness to a couple of wrestling matches. The first one was with a manzanita bush. Now, it's a fact of nature that at certain times, something about the manzanita makes it sort of like catnip for bears. Wow, this was good stuff. Wrestling bear like Yogurt, that had hardly been a good warm-up. Right now, he was in bad need of an opponent worthy of his talents. By an amazing coincidence, up the hill a ways was a gentleman named Lester Carpenter. Lester just happened to be the best catch-as-catch-can wrestler in all Lakeside. His other hobby was bird watching. Well, today he was going to get a little of one and a lot of the other, all in one trip. He'd heard about a tame bear that got away from that wrecked wagon. Might even be a reward out. All right, he'd just throw a rope on him and take him down to Sally's place. Yogurt had other ideas, though. It didn't take long for Lester to get the message. He was up against a real pro. Well, Lester knew the tricks of the trade himself. After a little preliminary sparring, he got a rolling front headlock, reversed his balance, and for a short count, he almost had Yogurt pinned. When Yogurt got out of that one, Lester came up with a side headlock. Look out! He rolled it into a figure-4 leg lock. That was when Yogurt finally got his favorite hold, the bear hug. Too bad Duke was the only spectator. It was going to be the longest match in history. 300 falls to a finish. During the past day and a half, Hurricane the Falcon had been having his problems too. But now he'd finally found his home again, the wagon, which had been brought up to Sally's place. By a stroke of luck, he happened to get there just when Sally was home between scouting trips. She had read up on her falconry enough to put together a falconer's lure. She wasn't too sure it was going to work, but there wasn't any doubt that Hurricane knew exactly what it meant.
Good bird. That's the way.
Well, that was one more down, and now only 2 to go. Meantime, Duke had put everything else aside while he followed the progress of this cross-country wrestling match. These two had already covered nearly 3 miles, and by now Lester had that reward figured at about $50. Well, it was about to go up a little more. Sally was surprised and pleased to see Lester Carpenter bringing in the bear. He sure looked like he deserved some kind of reward. It was a shame nobody had offered one.
Now you be careful with him, Lester. You're gonna hurt.
So the last the yogurt, and Lester did get his reward after all. He finally got loose from that grapple-happy bear. Sally figured that now only the kangaroo was left, but the kangaroo had recently been traded for the Asian leopard. Sally found that out a little later when old Gypsy Joe recovered consciousness. He couldn't tell her much about the cat, though, except that she was shy, afraid of people, and her name was Shondi. Like most big cats, Shondi could go for some time without food. Well, she was on her second day now, and her stomach said it was time to go hunting. Trouble was, food had always come to Shondi on a plate. When it came time to do her own hunting, Shondi was strictly an amateur leopard. What Shondi needed was a lot more ability and a little less ambition. She went right from one mistake to another. Shondi got the notion she'd better find something a little closer to bite size. The raccoon didn't know that thing was a leopard. He just aimed to bite anything that came close. It was Shondi's nose. Twice. By now, Shondi was bruised and battered in body and in spirit. In a strange and unfriendly world, she was just one lost and very lonesome leopard. Late that afternoon, a lonesome dog was following a strange trail. It led him straight to his hillside cave. Somehow Duke could sense Shondi's loneliness, her need for friendship. And so out of their common need, the bond was formed. It was a bond that would never be broken. Of course, the whole picture had changed for Sally. The big cat was a bigger problem than she'd expected, but it was too late to search anymore today. She sure hoped she'd do better tomorrow. Meanwhile, Duke and Shondi had been sharing a few moments of quiet companionship. But now it was getting along towards dinner time. Duke, there were always side trips on the dinner trail, sometimes including a little session of dig for the squirrel. As usual, all Duke got out of his digging was a better appetite. No matter. There was always a more dependable dinner waiting just a little ways down the hill. Might as well get Shondy and move along. It was well into twilight when they arrived at Sally's place. Naturally, in this old familiar setting, Duke knew exactly where he was going. This was the first solid food Shondy had seen in 2 whole days. It was plain that she needed it a lot worse than he did. There was no time to wonder about how or why. The point was, the leopard was here, and this might be the only chance Sally'd have to catch her. Of course, Gypsy Joe had said the cat was afraid of people, but there was no telling what she'd be like after 2 days in the wild. Wherever Shondy was going, Duke meant to follow. It was a touch-and-go situation that could have gone either way, but that was where Duke came in. It was through his friendship with Shondi that Duke came to understand at last what Sally had known all along. A dog belongs with people. It was as simple as that. Needless to say, there was only one natural ending for all this. Old Gypsy Joe decided to retire. Of course, Sally took over his animals and, in a small way, went into show business. The headliners were Shondi and Duke, but all of them were there. Buttercup and Yogurt and Hannibal, Lover Boy and Friend, Linus and Blossom, and of course, Finger. Naturally, Sally's circus was a family act because, just like Sally had always said, my family is a menagerie.